Hey, my friends. This is The Art of Prepping. I hope you guys are doing well today. Today's topic is bug out locations. You do hear a lot about bug out bags, get home bags, egress supplies, but you don't hear a lot of people talk about the plan, and like where you're going to go. And so when we talk about BOLs, bug out locations, we should have at least a few options. And not only just locations, plural, but various ways to get to each one. And while there are some remote locations that really you only have maybe one real way to get there, that is what it is. But in a lot of cases, you'll have two or more routes that you can take to get there. And sometimes you have to go on foot. So you have to look at all options. Just because your vehicle can't go a certain route doesn't mean that you can't take that route, in a worst case scenario. So obviously, if there's a road that leads to this location, take the road. If the road is open and usable, take the road. But if it's too dangerous to take the road, or if for whatever reason the road is not accessible, you have to find other options. And so I have 10 bug out location options here to consider. And this is not going to be something that's viable for everyone, but it may be that you just find a few on the list to consider and to think through. And once again, I recommend 2 or 3 at a minimum locations to have as an option to go to at any given time, day or night, if things got really bad where you are. And for the most part, when we can look at or consider like a bugging out scenario, most people default with the idea that they're going to have to leave their home. And that's pretty much, the majority of this. But it could be that you're at work. You could be at work and maybe you're just not able to go home, or maybe your home area is too close to work and that is also compromised. And so you definitely have to have sometimes locations that are away from the home and away from work. Now, let's just go ahead and give a couple examples of why would you want to bug out? Because for some people, it's very abstract, this whole concept. I get messages all the time, people asking, why would I ever want to leave my house if I'm in the house? Because I have all my supplies in the house. And I agree. You should never have to do that if it doesn't make sense. And you should never leave the home unless you have no other option. Most people have over 90% of their so-called survival gear at home. Not just it's not all in their car. It's not usually at another location. It's typically just in their house. And so why would you leave all your resources behind? So it doesn't make sense. And I agree, but there are certain situations that it's just too dangerous to stay in your home. And now these situations are fairly rare in the big picture of things, but they are there. They're present. And it could be something like a hurricane. If you have enough warning, maybe you just want to get out of that whole region, maybe leave the state, in fact, and so go somewhere else. It could be a tornado, if you have enough lead time that you would want to leave an area. It could be that you have a forest fire and that you live maybe in a forest or a wooded area. Maybe you live on the edge of a wooded area and there's a large fire or a brush fire. There's a lot of reasons that this could, be a situation that you'd want to leave. There could be a chemical spill. There could be a train that derails, and one of the cars on the train could be compromised, and that particular car could have been filled with dangerous chemicals, and if it gets out in the air, it could be deadly. So there's all kinds of things that could happen. And we're just scratching the surface. So it's really important to have options of some places to go outside of your immediate area, outside of your local area. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a local option as well, but it makes even more sense to have a few options in different directions that are more, further out or even more remote than where you are right now. So let's go ahead and get into the examples here of various bug out locations to consider. The first is a friend's house. It's so simple, right? It's just like a friend's house. It could be also a family member's house. Maybe you have a brother or sister that lives 30, 40 miles west of you, and the threat is east of you. Well, maybe it makes sense to go in the opposite direction, right? Now, before you just decide to go to this person's house ahead of time, you want to ask them if that's okay. You don't want to just show up with yourself, or maybe you have a family. You don't want to just show up with your whole family in the middle of the night and say, hey, we have a problem and we need to seek shelter. You want to arrange all this ahead of time, right? So you want to ask permission, before any emergency happens. Can we come over if things get bad? You also want to pre-stage that location when possible. And that means like the next time you go over and visit your friend, or, it could be your brother or sister or whoever, you want to bring some supplies with you as long as they have space to store it. So maybe like a tote box or two of supplies. It could be storable, like long-term storable food. It could be like a few changes of clothes. It could be some hygiene products. It could be just a lot of things, right? Whatever it is that you want to have there. So in a worst case scenario, if you don't even have time to grab anything, you can just go straight to that location, and at least you'll have something because you already have things there. You pre-staged it. So just make sure that there's enough room at that location for you, especially if you have a family that you're bringing with, because some houses and some locations may already be crowded. They may not have room for another family to move in for a few days. I mean, that's just how it is sometimes. So just make sure they have enough room. What I kind of prefer, though, is locations that kind of have maybe like a basement that you can go into, like a reinforced section of a basement that, that could be usable for sheltering if you need to even shelter at that location. Maybe a garage, so if something goes on in the house, like maybe there's just too much going on, or there's not enough room in the house for yourself or whatnot, maybe you can just stay in the garage or something until you can get, back to your house. So I'm just looking at various options here. When you're talking about this kind of situation, going to a friend's house, for example. The second option that I was thinking about was the campgrounds. A lot of people might be thinking the same thing, though. So you're going to have to be careful on this. So you could go and take your chance with this. But I think maybe even a better idea would be to find maybe like your own space, or your own spot in the woods, your own place in the woods. So obviously, like, campgrounds are really awesome because they typically have like a flat area, right, to put a tent. And they typically have trees that are kind of like ideal in terms of their spacing for like hammocks. They typically have like a covered pavilion area. And they have like picnic tables and place to cook food, and typically it's in a nice area too, that they have like garbage cans, and there's like possibly a lake or a pond nearby or something like that in a lot of places. And so it's desirable, but you know what, how it is that the more people that you have in concentration in an area, the more problems. That's just how it is with people. And so you want privacy, you don't want to be stacked on top of each other. You don't want to just be like amongst hundreds or even thousands of other people doing the same thing. So even if you have to hike 10, 20 minutes in the woods from the campground space, that's going to be worthwhile. You're going to have more privacy, more security, just more overall peace of mind. So consider that. A third thing to consider, in terms of bugging out locations is like ghost towns or ghost neighborhoods, remote abandoned buildings. What you typically find is that over time, certain areas are economically depressed, and people move out from that area and no one moves in. And you just have abandoned homes and factories and buildings. Sometimes you also have areas that are hit by like storm systems, like maybe a whole area, like a whole neighborhood or part of a city is destroyed from like a hurricane or something. And while some of those areas do get rebuilt, sometimes there are sections or areas of those cities and towns that don't get rebuilt. And so you still have like structures, but they're not really great structures, but they're still there, like, that you could possibly take advantage of if you had to. So those are some options, but of course that's something that you would probably pick, though, if you were more desperate, unless, you knew of places that were remote and safe, and all this. If you can get access to them, it could be a real option, but it just depends on your situation, though. It gets kind of complicated, as you can see. Number 4 is your vacation home. Now, not everyone has a vacation home. I would dare to say that most people do not have a vacation home. I don't have a vacation home. I kind of don't really need one. I kind of consider where I live currently kind of more like a vacation home. But yeah, a vacation home. If you don't have one yourself, maybe you know someone that has a vacation home that's like relatively close by, and I mean quote unquote like within a couple 100 miles that you could travel to. That's more or less realistic to go to. Not like it's on the other side of the country or something, But yeah, so if you don't have a vacation home, if you know someone, maybe you can ask them, can I go there if I ever had an emergency? It could be a cabin, in the woods, or a cabin on the lake, or it could just be another house that someone else owns. I also know some people who have like wine cellars or root cellars. And this is something that maybe the person doesn't really want to give you access to their cabin or their summer home, but maybe they have a cellar that is pretty nice and you could shelter in there for a few days if you had to. And maybe they give you just the keys to the cellar if it's like a part of a detached structure away from the house. It's just something. I mean, it's better than nothing, right? I mean, that would probably be a lot better than just living in a tent or a tarp shelter or living in a hammock for a few days. Especially if it was cold out or really hot out, a cellar would be really welcomed. Number 5, you could bug out on a boat. Now, this obviously isn't for everyone. Not everyone has access to boats, or they don't know, maybe that you just don't know someone that has a boat. Maybe there's just not that many bodies of water in your area, so maybe that's not really that realistic to some people, but to a lot of people I know, this is actually one of their top picks, believe it or not. Some people that I've met on the internet over the years have told me they have houseboats, and that would be like one of their first places to go, and they're on large lakes, and they would just go out in the middle of the lake, and that would pretty much isolate them from a whole host of threats. So it's just something to consider if that's within your realm of options. Number 6 is a hunting camp. And there are some really, really nice hunting blinds. I've seen some that are like elevated up, like 10 or more feet off the ground on a platform. And there's like an enclosed structure, like literally it has doors and windows, and it's like a little like cabin on a platform for hunting. And I mean, they're not that cheap either. I've seen some that are like over $10,000, and people set these up in various hunting areas. And maybe you would go there, spend a few days. I mean, that wouldn't be that bad, actually. As long as you have some food and water and stuff with you, it wouldn't be that bad at all. So even if you don't have like a really nice hunting blind, even just having a tent in a hunting area that you're familiar with could work. I mean, it could work. Or maybe you have blinds, like those portable blinds that you could just bring with you and set up, and you could just camp in there for a few days. Number 7, and of course, this is an option that isn't available to everyone, but there are a lot of people that have access to a local cave system. Where I live, there's a lot of caves all over the place, in fact. And you got to be careful about this. You don't want to probably venture into a cave very far, especially if you're not familiar with it, and it could be very dangerous. But in terms of just going in maybe the first few feet and just kind of getting some shelter, if that's the whole point of this, is just to get away from a threat, that could be an option. It could be an option. Number 8 is going to maybe like a friend's barn. Now, we've talked about going into the home or maybe like a garage or even a cellar, but these days barns have gotten really nice, and they have like individual rooms, some of them have air conditioning or heating. Some of them, like the tackle rooms, I've been into some tackle rooms in barns over the years that are really nice. I mean, it's almost like going into a room of a house. I mean, just really nice. So it could be an option in some situations that you could just camp out or just hang out, in a barn. Some people have couches in rooms in barns. So this whole idea that, barns are just nasty and a bunch of dirty animals are living in there, it's not always the case. It just depends on what farm you're talking about and what kind of barn and all this. Some people have barns, but they don't even have animals. They just farm, and they just use the barn to store some of their equipment, or to store some of the foods that they grow. It just depends on the farm. So maybe a farm, that's like 10, 20 miles away, and you're on, you have like a working relationship with them. Let's go with that. You have a working relationship with them. Maybe you could just say, hey, in a worst case scenario, if I can't stay at my house because of whatever situation, can I come and just hang out in your barn, And I'm sure most people wouldn't really care, as long as you're not causing problems. Number 9, storm shelters and bunkers. A lot of people do have storm shelters. I don't really know anyone that has a real bunker. But, if you just happen to know someone that has like an oversized storm shelter or has a bunker, and they don't mind you to come over and, if you just have nowhere else to go, that could be an option. But what you typically find is people who have real bunkers, they don't tell people that they have a real bunker. So it might be harder to know about this. But if you have a separate piece of land, this is something you could consider. And this is something that some people do, is they buy a shed, whatever size you want, and before they buy the shed, they have a storm system put in, like a storm shelter put in, or a bunker put in. And they put the shed over top of the entrance, right, going down underground to that shelter or that bunker. And so you could have some living space above in the actual shed, which you can convert the shed and you can insulate it, and you can have all kinds of things. You can have solar panel, solar system, and have electricity. So you could run an air conditioner or a heater or whatnot. You could even have a wood stove in there. So you can modify sheds to your heart's content, but you could also have it as a cover to kind of, conceal the entrance to another structure, a shelter or a bunker system that you could go into for more protection. Just something to consider. So that's what a lot of people do. Not a lot, but I'm saying that there are some people report this, that they kind of buy a remote piece of land and they put, some type of underground structure there, and they conceal it. And that's just like an option for them. Lastly, though, I want to say in number 10, a bug out location could be wherever you drive. And that might sound a little generic, but let's say that you have maybe like it's a converted van, or maybe it's just an SUV you have, and you have enough room in the back that you can sleep in. Maybe you have a recreational vehicle that's made to be like lived in for a short period of time, whatever it is, but that you have some type of vehicle that you could actually live out of for a period of time. And wherever you drive and park, well, there's your bug out location. So that's definitely a possible option. And there's a lot of people that have had to resort to that because they didn't really have enough plans ahead of time to really go somewhere specific. So I'm hoping that you would have more options than just this last one. But this is something that, as a last case scenario, you could always just get in your car if you have a car. If you don't have a car, then you're even in a bigger problem. But you can just drive away from the threat and then park somewhere. It could even just be a parking lot. You just park somewhere and then figure out what your next step is. But sometimes the bigger the vehicle, the bigger the problems, because you're getting more attention to yourself. You're bringing more attention. If you pull into someone's parking lot, maybe they have a small business, and you pull in there with this big RV and you park there for a few hours, they're probably going to come out and tell you to leave because, if you're not doing business with them, plus you have this large vehicle, it stands out. That would be very different, though, than if you just had a regular, RV or a passenger van, and you were kind of like sheltering there for a while, and you parked into a real large parking lot, maybe in a mall's parking lot, or maybe you went to like a Walmart's parking lot, and you just kind of got lost in the crowd. You just kind of parked with everybody else. That would probably make a lot more sense. It's called stealth camping, and you could definitely learn a lot about stealth camping, and that could be an option. But once again, from a lot of people, it's not really like an optimum type of choice to pick, just because you are still quite vulnerable to things around you, and you typically don't have the privacy and that you would really want. And eventually, if you stay there long enough, people will notice you, and then they could call law enforcement on you, and then you're just going to have, possibly a hassle. And then you kind of have to explain, the situation, and some people just won't understand, and you know how it is. So it's best when possible to remove yourself from the population. So even with the vehicle, I would have a low-key, stealthy vehicle that doesn't bring attention to itself, and I would probably not try to park in high populated areas. Even though you could go and do that, it is an option. Some people, they prefer it because they like to be around other people, but once again, being around other people increases your chance of being a victim of a crime or whatnot. So in my opinion, I think it's best just to kind of park away from everybody and kind of almost try to camouflage yourself and not to be even seen. So that, to me, that means get out of cities and towns, just to get away from everybody. And if that means you just find a little road and that's off the main road, and you drive that down that little road and just park off to the side and no one sees you from the main road, you might be able to stay there for a day or two without anyone seeing you at all. And if someone does see you and they say, "Hey, this is my property, what are you doing?" You can just say, "Hey, I'm just having a hard time, and I'm just kind of getting away from this problem that happened, or that storm system. Did you hear about that?" And then they'll probably say, "Oh, you came from there," and you could say, "Yeah, you just didn't have anywhere else to go." But just brainstorm and have other options, so you don't have to just be that person though that pulls off the side of the road and is just going to have to just take whatever is there. That's really not desirable, especially if it's in the middle of winter and there's like 2 feet of snow. It's going to be a really bad option to pull off the side of the road and just car camp. It's not a very good idea unless you're completely set up for that in your vehicle. So I hope this helps. You guys take care. Catch you later.